I was told I had to choose my family or my future, stay in the cold and be a good daughter, or move to the sun and be abandoned. For a long time, I thought that was my only choice, a binary code for my own happiness, where one option always led to a catastrophic error. This is the story of how I refused to accept that ultimatum, how I decided to rewrite my own life, and how I found a third option. Every story about leaving has a story about staying that comes first. Mine was written in frost on window panes, and in that particular shade of gray that a Canadian sky holds for what feels like half the year. It was a good story, a comfortable one. It was a story of deep, unconditional love, of inside jokes with my sister that needed no translation, of the specific comfort that comes from my mom's cooking a language of care I understood my entire life. Life in Canada was predictable, not in a bad way, but in the way a favorite book is. You know the characters, you know the rhythm of the chapters, the vibrant, short-lived joy of summer, the stunning beauty of fall, and then the long, slow, deep breath of winter. For me, that breath had started to feel less like a peaceful hibernation and more like I was just holding it, waiting for permission to finally exhale. I felt like I was always in my town, in my role, in the life that was so lovingly laid out for me. The idea of Australia didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It was more like a slow sunrise I hadn't realized I was watching. It started with a photo. A friend of a friend posted a picture from a place called the Gold Coast. It was all impossible blues and blindingly white sand, but it wasn't the landscape that caught my breath. It was the people. They were just living, outdoors, in the middle of what for me was a miserable November. They were surfing, laughing, sitting at a cafe with no walls. It looked like a permanent state of exhale. That tiny seed of curiosity started to sprout. I went from looking at pictures to devouring blogs, vlogs, and forums. I learned that the Australian lifestyle wasn't just about the weather. It was this whole culture of being outside, of work-life balance, and a laid-back attitude that felt worlds away from my own anxiety. While Canadians are known for being polite, Australians had this fair-go mentality that spoke to a part of me I hadn't met yet, a part that wanted to bet on myself. The dream became my quiet obsession. I'd spend my evenings, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through visa requirements and apartment listings in Melbourne. Melbourne, with its art scene and its coffee obsession, felt like a place I could belong. I read up on the job market, the quality of life, the healthcare, all the practical things that could turn a fantasy into a blueprint. But under all that, something deeper was stirring. I needed a new narrative. My story felt like it had already been written. And while I loved my family more than anything, I wanted to write a chapter they couldn't have imagined for me. I wanted to prove I could build something from scratch, that my identity was more than just a collection of familiar relationships. The decision wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small ones. It was every time I said one day, and a little voice in my head asked, "Why not now?" It was every brutally cold morning scraping ice off my windshield, thinking about the warm breeze on the other side of the world. It was the slow burn of what if turning into I can. I started the paperwork. I updated my resume. I saved money with a ferocity that surprised even me. Each step was a quiet rebellion against the comfortable life I knew. I was choosing my dream life, but I hadn't yet realized I was about to be asked to choose it over my family. The air in the living room was thick. It was a Sunday, the kind we'd had 1,000 times before, with the smell of coffee and the low hum of the TV. But this time was different. ID finally worked up the courage to tell them. My dream was no longer an abstract someday. It was a concrete next year. I explained my plan, talking about the visa, the job prospects, the life I pictured. I tried to paint a picture of excitement, of opportunity. I was so naive. I thought they would see my dream. Instead, they only saw me leaving. The conversation is a blur of pain now, but some sentences are burned into my memory. It was my mom who said it, her voice trembling. "If you go, you're on your own. We won't be a part of it. You're choosing a life without us." It wasn't a discussion. It was an ultimatum. Stay and keep your family. Go and lose them. The fallout was immediate. It felt like a physical blow. The people who were my safety net were suddenly the ones daring me to walk a tightrope. In the days and weeks that followed, I was drowning in guilt. Was I selfish? A terrible daughter? My mom's fear that her future grandchildren wouldn't know her was a weight I hadn't truly considered. But the most brutal conflict wasn't happening in strained phone calls or silent dinners. It was happening in my own head. My self-doubt, usually a quiet passenger, suddenly had a megaphone. "You can't do this. You're not strong enough to be alone. You're going to fail, and when you do, you'll have no one to call. You're throwing away the most important thing in your life for a fantasy about sunshine." This internal battle was exhausting. It felt like I was being pulled apart. One part of me was this adventurous, hopeful person who saw a new horizon, and the other was a terrified child, desperate not to be abandoned. The practical stress of the move became almost unbearable under this emotional weight. Every email about my visa, every dollar I moved to an Australian bank account, felt like an act of defiance. The cost of living in cities like Melbourne is significantly higher than in Canada, and the financial pressure was immense. Every expense was a reminder of the choice I was making, a tangible symbol of the life I was buying at what felt like an impossible emotional cost. I was grieving a loss that hadn't even happened yet. The bond with my family, my anchor, now felt like a chain. The ultimatum had worked. It turned my beautiful dream into a source of deep pain and self-doubt. For a long time, I genuinely believed I had only two choices: give up on my dream or give up on my family. I was stuck. The breaking point didn't come with a shout, but a whisper. I was sitting in my car after another tense phone call with my mom. The windows were fogged up, trapping me in a little bubble of my own misery. I'd just spent 20 minutes defending my ambition, only to hear the same painful question. "Why isn't what you have here good enough?" As I hung up, my own self-doubt echoed her words. "What's so wrong with you that you can't just be happy here?" I felt the familiar sting of tears, the weight of guilt pressing down. I was so close to giving up, so close to deleting the visa application and surrendering to the life that was expected of me. But then, another question surfaced, quiet but persistent. What if being happy here means being a lesser version of myself? That was it. That was the turning point. I realized the ultimatum wasn't just coming from my family. The most powerful one was the one I'd imposed on myself. The choice between being a good daughter and being a whole person. Their fear had amplified my own. The real battle wasn't against them. It was against the part of me that believed my worth was measured by my willingness to shrink myself to fit the life they'd planned for me. This wasn't about choosing Australia over my family. It was about choosing myself. It was about giving myself permission to be happy. My revenge on self-doubt wasn't an act of anger. It was liberation. It was a promise to that scared, hopeful version of me that I wouldn't let her down. I would take her to the other side of the world and prove that she was capable of building a life on her own terms. That night, I went online. I clicked confirm on my flight to Melbourne. My hand trembled as a wave of pure terror and exhilaration washed over me. There was no going back. Telling my family was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. There were tears. There was anger. The ultimatum was repeated, but this time it had lost its power. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I just said, "I love you. That will not change. But I have to do this for me. I am not choosing between you and this life. I am choosing to have both. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." It was a declaration of independence not from them, but from the fear that held us all hostage. I realized it was okay to be heartbroken and hopeful at the same time. This journey wasn't about escaping pain, but learning to carry it. The decision was made. The ticket was booked. I was finally ready to fight the battle against my own self-doubt. Does moving abroad feel like you're betraying your family? Have you ever had to choose between your own dream and the expectations of people you love? It is a roller coaster of emotions, and I know I'm not the only one who has been on this ride. Let's talk about it in the comments. Share your story, your struggle, your moment of decision. I'd love to hear it. The first few weeks in Melbourne were a brutal, beautiful collision of reality and expectation. The jet lag felt like a physical manifestation of how disjointed I was my body in Australia, while my heart was 16 hours behind. Loneliness was my constant companion. I'd walk through buzzing streets, surrounded by people, yet feel completely alone. The simplest things, like figuring out the tram system, felt monumental. Everything was a reminder that I was an outsider. Life was far more expensive than I was used to, and my savings were shrinking at an alarming speed. There were nights I'd lie awake in my tiny room, overwhelmed by homesickness. I missed the most mundane things, my sister barging into my room, the weight of my mom's quilt, the easy comfort of a shared joke. The video calls were a lifeline, but they also highlighted the distance. Seeing their faces on a screen, living their lives in a world that was carrying on without me, felt like watching a movie of a life I used to have. But slowly, painfully, I began to build. And building a life from scratch is not a glamorous montage. It's a series of small, awkward steps. It was forcing myself to go to a meetup where I stood in a corner for 20 minutes before finally talking to someone. It was the thrill of getting a job, not my dream job, but a job. It was finding a cafe where the barista eventually remembered my name. These were tiny victories, but they were mine. I was building a support network, one fragile connection at a time. And then, a funny thing started to happen with my family. The anger began to soften, worn down by the consistency of my effort. I didn't wait for them to call. I called them. I learned their schedules. We started having virtual dinners, eating together over video chat. I sent them photos of my apartment, my new friends, the weird-looking birds in the park. I shared my struggles and my triumphs. I was making them feel involved, not like an audience to my new life. The third option wasn't a magic solution. It was a commitment. It was the hard work of redefining a relationship. It meant showing them through action that my love for them wasn't conditional on my postal code. My dad started sending me articles about Australian politics. My sister started planning a visit. And my mom, in a moment that made me cry, sent me a care package with my favorite Canadian snacks and a note that said, "It's still cold here. I hope you're enjoying the sun." It isn't perfect. I still feel a pang of guilt when I miss a birthday. But the ultimatum is gone. In its place is something more complex, resilient, and honest. We're learning to love each other across oceans. I came to Australia to find sunshine, but what I really found was myself. This story doesn't really end because the journey doesn't have an endpoint. Life is still a beautiful, complicated mess of navigating time zones and nurturing relationships that span the globe. There's no perfect happy ending where all the conflict magically dissolves. The reality is an ongoing negotiation of love, distance, and identity. But the choice was never truly about Canada versus Australia or family versus future. The real choice was between fear and love. Fear tells you to stay small, to not rock the boat. Love for your family, but also love for yourself demands that you be whole. It demands that you grow, even if it means growing in a different direction. Choosing my dream life didn't mean leaving my family behind. It meant inviting them to love a new, more complete version of me. It meant proving that family bonds aren't so fragile they can be broken by geography. They can be stretched and tested, but they can, and they will, hold. And that is the third option. That's the story I'm still writing.